at yesterday's event to bring newcomers into the loop. So, Susan, will you do this for us today?
Yes, of course. This is Jomar, and I'm Susan. We are MCs for today. Good morning, everyone. Please allow me to give you a brief recap of the first day of our Congress yesterday. The Congress opened with a warm welcome from Father Giuseppe Arce and Miss Cecilia Caro, our spiritual directors of Mariapolis Peace. The International EoC Commission, chaired by Dr. Luigino Bruni, was introduced by Francis and Tess Ganson of the EoC of Asia and the Philippines. Introduced also were Rupert and Genevieve from the Center of the Focolare in Italy, in Rome. Alignment of Congress expectations and objectives were presented by Ms. Tina Bonifacio. To lay the premise of this Congress, a short video of the beginnings of EoC was shown, highlighting the birth of this new mindset born out of Chiara Lubic's vision of an economy where no one is in need. This was in 1991 in Brazil, when Chiara was moved by the cityscape of Sao Paulo, showing the great divide between the rich and the poor. The high point of the day was the talk of Dr. Luigino Bruni on what is EoC and its principles. The key elements are as follows. EoC is human-centric. It puts man in the center of all economic activities. The goal is no one is in need. The poor is a factor of the economic equation because poverty has its own competencies and wealth, such as integrity, trust, proximity, respect, esteem, resiliency. There are two steps to address poverty. First, to discover the competencies by building relationship. Second, with relationship, outside intervention can be provided. In building an enterprise, Dr. Bruni presented to us 3 models to choose from. One is the animal model, and the other is the botanic model. The botanical model recognizes the intelligence of the trees. He said, plants have feelings. They have their own language. They have their own sensitivities. They protect each other. Man does not see this intelligence because plants are slow. Whereas man is fast, always moving. It is only when man grows old, when he becomes slow, that he begins to recognize plants and see their intelligence. Tree is not mobile, it is stuck. Its roots are anchored in the soil, far-reaching, making it stable. To protect itself from predators, its functions are well distributed in all of the parts of its body, so that even if 50 to 80% of the body dies, or even with just 1% of life remains, it can regenerate itself and flourish again. On one hand, the animal is brain-centric. So when it dies, that's the end of it. In the enterprise, where functions are well distributed throughout its structure, when the founder dies, the enterprise continues to sustain itself. It never dies. That is the essence of EoC. On work, Dr. Bruni shared his thoughts on the concept of work. When man undergoes crises or difficulties, it slows him down. But at the moment that he goes back to work, he begins to have full life again. Like the widow, he said, who after undergoing grief, she continues to do again her household chores and live her normal life again. Dr. Budi said that here we can say that work is a source of life, of spirit. Work and spirituality are one and the same. So work never stops because it is life and spirituality. This is EoC. So in the next 25 years, the hope is that Asian EoC will also overcome the rest of the world, just like the Asian GDP overtook the European Union and the United States GDP in 2010 onwards. The challenge of the next 25 years. I hope I gave justice to the very profound talk of Dr. Bruni. The rest of the afternoon was full of fun, getting to know each other in a different way, and capping the day was a cultural presentation of the citizens of Mariapolis Peace. Thank you very much, and let's all look forward to a more exciting day ahead.
Thank you, Susan, for that profound and crisp update. Sets the tone of our days ahead. Now, let's move on to our next speaker, or for our first speaker. Our first speaker is a Dutch project coordinator of Filipino descent with the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, Netherlands. She's also a research fellow at the Institute of International and Development Economics in the same country. She finished her International Economics Master's degree from the University of the Philippines, School of Economics in 1991, and obtained her doctorate in economics from Erasmus University, Rotterdam in 2006. She has many published papers on various economic topics about Asian and European markets. She's currently working simultaneously on about 5 papers on various topics ranging from trade, manufacturing, etc. Now let me call on Dr. Annette Pelkmans-Balaoing, PhD.
It's better. This makes it very official. Not on. I don't think it's on. Is it? Hello? I just have to make it close. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It just came into my mind a few days ago that it was exactly 30 years ago that I came to live here in the house over there to start the school the permanent school for the new generation of the Focolare movement. And now I'm here 30 years, coming back here to give these talks. I do it with a lot of gratefulness. So my talk is on globalized Asia, new opportunities for solidarity. It's a big theme, especially to talk about it in 30 minutes. But what makes it easy is that globalization is something that we experience in our daily lives. My mother asked me last night what my talk
was going to be about. And I said, it's going to be about globalization, thinking that globalization is something that everybody knows, you know? And then she asked me, what's globalization? So I said, okay, I have to maybe start with the definition of globalization. It's the internationalization of our world economy. Anyway, it has many aspects, but my talk for this morning is going to be concentrated on the economic aspect of this internationalization of the world economy. But it's more than that, and I'm going to explain it to you later. This is the phenomenon of the free flow of goods, of services, of capital, of ideas, of labor. It's a world without frontiers. That's another way that you can understand globalization. So we experience globalization in our daily lives. For those of you who have the smartphones, access to Wi-Fi, those who are fortunate enough to travel because of the lower cost of transportation, for those who earn enough to go to the malls and experience this huge variety of goods available at such accessible prices, then globalization is a blessing. But for those who have none of this, then globalization is a curse because it is largely experienced in the form of low wages, repressed wages, low prices for your produce, or less access to the resources like land, water, and other resources because of the increasing appropriability of these resources by big business. So there are two phases of globalization, good and bad, and no wonder there's so much emotion, so much conflicting emotion attached to this phenomenon. And I would like to go through with you these two phases of globalization and understand it much better so that we can also navigate the path towards the opportunities that clearly lies ahead. Okay. So in no other place in the world would you see the transformative power of globalization as in Asia. And here I refer to the consequences of this expansion of markets for the economic growth of Asia. To understand why globalization will have this effect, let me briefly talk about a bit of history, or what we call the waves of globalization. Before the advent of globalization, societies were agrarian and poor. So there's very little divergence between the North and the South. Although in 1750, do you know which two countries in the world produced 73% of world manufacturing output? It's China and India in 1750. Okay. But something happened in the first wave of globalization. A revolution happened. It's the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom. In the pre-globalized world, production and consumption occurred in one place. So production took place where the products are consumed. This meant small markets, small production, low subsistence income, and therefore most villages or most households were poor. The Industrial Revolution led to three game changers that changed our economic lives. So these are technology, scale economies, and expansion of markets. The falling transport costs because of technology meant that production no longer had to take place where consumption took place. So this is why we call globalization as the great unbundling. So you unbundle production and consumption, and you pull production in one place in factories so that you can realize these scale economies. And scale economies means the more you produce, the lower is the cost per unit. Okay? So production can be put in one place, and scale economy is a key concept and also a very important good in globalization, because greater scale of production meant lower unit costs, leading to lower prices, more competitiveness, more market share, allowing for a further expansion of scale. And what drives scale economies? It's that famous division of labor, which according to Adam Smith, is the key to the wealth of nations. The greater is the opportunity to sell to a big market, the greater is the possibility to further increase or refine this division of labor. And this virtuous cycle of bigger markets, larger scale economies, greater efficiency, more productivity, resulted to the divergence between the industrializing North and deindustrializing South. In fact, by 1913, the share of the developing world in world production has shrunk to 7.5% from 73% in 1750. Okay? That's why I called it a deindustrializing South. In the second wave of globalization, the opposite happened. And this is how we can understand the phenomenon of what we call the factory Asia. Rapid technological progress led to another type of unbundling. It is the unbundling of the factory itself. So before, it's the unbundling of production and consumption, and now we unbundle the factory itself. We segment the task or the segments in production within a factory. And this meant that you can actually split, for instance, the task that require more labor from the tasks that require more capital. And then you could produce the task that uses more labor in countries where labor is cheap. And then you can produce the products that require more capital or technology in countries where this is reduction of poverty in Asia has been dramatic. China and India are particularly responsible for shrinking the absolute number of poor today. And by poor, I mean people living below the income threshold of $1.90. It has been reduced, it's been updated from $1.25. So we have seen almost 1.5 billion people escape extreme poverty compared to 3 decades ago, despite a nearly 60% increase in the developing world population. In fact, China and India alone accounts for about 44% of the world poor. So although there's a dramatic decrease in poverty, still 44% of the people living extreme poverty, meaning below the $1.09, reside here in Asia. However, this unprecedented wealth has also increased the divide between the rich and the poor, the skilled and the unskilled, the urban and the rural dweller. So if you can imagine this process of globalization wherein all of these labor-intensive jobs are being offshored to the south, largely to Asia. But in Asia, these jobs are relatively skilled intensive. So that's why people who work in foreign companies or in foreign factories, on average, earn about 40% higher in terms of salary because these are relatively skilled intensive. So these are labor using jobs compared to the north. For the south, these are relatively the skilled intensive jobs, and that's why you have an increasing chasm or difference between those who have the skill and those who do not have the skill. So the uneven impact of globalization on Asian society also may exacerbate this internal division, especially in multi-ethnic states, with some groups benefiting from globalization more than the others. Let's say the ethnic Chinese in Indonesia or in Malaysia, social cohesion might be threatened. And we also saw this in the latest results in the Philippine election, wherein you see that all this frustration of anger of all those people who felt that they have been surpassed by the prosperity that the country has experienced in the last 6 years of the previous government. So you see also this phenomenon in the Philippines. In addition, the introduction of the increasingly Western-dominated international culture is feared to spark the erosion of traditional values in many Asian societies. So the impact of globalization could be regarded as acute, especially against the backdrop of a continent known for its deep spiritual tradition. Asia is home to the world's great religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, and many more. The march of materialism and consumerism is a stark contrast to the values of simplicity, material detachment, which are deeply entrenched in all Oriental religions. The profound respect for nature, for instance, especially in Hinduism or in Jainism, where you see monks even covering their mouth for fear of swallowing an insect, is in deep contradiction to the wanton exploitation of natural resources seen in many places in Asia today. The deforestation in Southeast Asia, for instance, to make way for the expansion of the palm oil or the palm plantation for palm oil. So this is in deep contradiction to the Asian values, the respect of nature that we see that we find in Asian tradition. The strong communal spirit in many societies, like the Gotong Royong in Indonesia or the Bayanihan in the Philippines, is said to be losing ground to the increasing individualism, which some see as a result of greater self-sufficiency and welfare. It's also a result of greater urbanization when people get uprooted from their local communities, so the sense of communities is also much less. The importance of family and strict parental guidance and discipline that characterizes Asian families is being undermined also, especially in countries like the Philippines, where overseas migration has been resulting to separation of parents from their children or spouses from one another. So the economic cost of globalization on Asia can further increase in the third wave of globalization. So there's now another wave of globalization characterized instead by the digital revolution. Not only will the digital revolution further widen the gap between the skilled and the wealthy few and the rest of society, it is said to threaten millions of jobs as machines take over many routine and codifiable tasks. Asia, home to millions of unskilled workers, could see the great motor of economic growth slow down to a pace that will not be sufficient to further reduce poverty or inequality in the region. The digital revolution, unlike the great technological revolutions in the past, will generate less employment, even as it creates unprecedented wealth to a happy few. This is the phenomenon, some of you might have heard of it, of the jobless growth. Which now brings me to my previous question about what is happening with the income divergence between the North and the South. The answer, of course, is not black and white because there is no such a thing as a homogeneous North or South. But for the sake of simplicity, allow me to just continue with the reference to the North and the South. The gulf between the North and South has widened largely because the North is home to the biggest multinationals, or what we call the foreign lead firms in global production networks, while the South is home to the millions of big and small local supply firms employing the millions of workers that keep our global factories running. In this era of globalization dominated by the relatively few but incredibly big multinationals, the large share of wealth goes to those who own the technology, the brands, the logistical network, the advertising power, and the organizational savvy. These things ensure that the barriers to entry in the markets where they dominate will remain high. And when the barriers are high, it means there are few of them, and therefore their market shares are bigger, and therefore their profits are much more large. The sectors where many of our poor entrepreneurs are active, on the contrary, are characterized with labor intensity, low technology, which ensure that the barriers to entry in these sectors remain low, and competition therefore is much more fierce, and thus profit and prices will remain squeezed. Amidst this gloomy globalization landscape, where are the signs of hope? Where are the opportunities for solidarity? There's been many doom scenarios predicted by economists in the past, explaining why many refer to the economics as the dismal science. Allow me to prove that economics is not so dismal by talking about the opportunities amidst these challenges. But let me begin by saying that while globalization offers a wide array of opportunities for business, big and small, the current economic systems and structure will ensure that they will largely be accessible to the skilled, to the highly motivated, creative individual and firms, so that the remaining 90% of the populations or so will still be marginalized. I'm still being dismal, I'm sorry, but okay, that's the last part of the dismal part. That's why I did not say new opportunities for globalization, I said new opportunities for solidarity. In fact, my thesis is that solidarity is in itself the way to unlock these opportunities. There are visible seeds of solidarity where you would least expect them. For instance, Adidas has partnered with Muhammad Yunus Grameen Bank to produce low-cost shoes for the poor in Bangladesh. These shoes are cheap, affordable even for the poor, and will protect them from loads of diseases. The Kraft Heinz, the one who produces your ketchup, for instance, launched the micronutrient campaign to address iron deficiency, anemia, and mineral malnutrition among infants and children in the developing world, distributing distributing to more than 5 million children in 15 developing countries sachets of vitamins and mineral powders, costing only about 2 cents per sachet. Philips has installed 100 community light centers across Africa, which is an area as big as a small soccer field lit with solar LED lighting to function as a communal area supporting activities like sports, healthcare, education, commercial activities by enabling communal life after dark. In the Philippines, you will know about the partnership of Jollibee with thousands of or hundreds of onion farmers that supply in their chain. There are at least 3 main differences of these examples of what we call corporate social responsibilities. And there are many of these from those that we have seen in the past. There are at least 3 main differences of these examples that I've said from all these CSRs. First, these initiatives, in comparison with past initiatives, fall within the core competencies of these companies. They are not the typical philanthropic activities such as offering scholarships or sponsoring daycare facilities or medical missions. The green product sales of Philips, for instance, exceeded half of their sales of the company, making sustainable performance a stronger driver for their brand. So the shift towards a more integral approach to corporate social responsibility, or CSR, is a move towards what we call shared value creation, where the creation of economic value for the company becomes a way to create value for society itself. So this development is still far from perfect, but it puts business in the mainstream of solving societal problems and becomes a valuable partner for government and civic society groups. This is also what they call the broadening of the partnering space, including business, which in the past is seen as the problem, is seen as part of the problem, is seen as the part of the solution in solving many of our societal problems. Secondly, the incentive to aspire for more sustainability and inclusiveness is born from a clear calculus of corporate interest. Sustainability and inclusiveness for many businesses who chose this path is not something that they have decided to do because they want it. It's something that they are pursuing because they need it. They see the security of their supply chains being threatened because of environmental issues. They see their overall markets being eroded because of falling purchasing of power. And they see the increasing cost of expansion because of the lack of the technological know-how of their local producers. So the transition towards a sustainable business model, however, is not a smooth and easy process. It will take leadership and a change of mindset to develop a truly inclusive business culture. And this is why I call it's not yet perfect. It's an evolution. It's a process that is evolving. And this is also why I call it seeds of solidarity, because the pursuit of sustainability and inclusiveness from the point of view of corporate interest is still far from our ideal of solidarity, which is driven by a vision of fraternity born from the belief that we are brothers and sisters under one Father. So thirdly, the greater attention given by big firms towards sustainability of their supplier base could be a beneficial effect in terms of linking small and medium enterprises more effectively to bigger markets, thus exposing them to the more positive side of globalization. Economists predict a sluggish or a very, very slow increase in the jobs in the future, at least those jobs and employment opportunities meant for the poor. But this forecast assumes that the status quo where job creation is driven mostly by large firms. It does not take into account the potential explosion of employment and income-generating opportunities once the global, regional, and even local supply chains are able to link and tap to the thousands and thousands of small and medium enterprises, which comprises about 90 to 95% of establishments in every economy. So solidarity is indeed the key to unlock all of these opportunities, but it is also a source of strength to face the threat of globalization. For the entrepreneurs among us, the environment you face is much more hostile, especially if you are in labor-intensive sectors, such as in garments or in shoemaking or even in furniture, where you are up against the persistent trends of lower prices and profits due to the powerful forces of scale economies. My suggestion is that we also scale up our solidarity, not only within our enterprises, but especially with other enterprises within our sector or in our own supply chains. Solidarity can be a source of competitive edge. We can, for instance, pool our resources so that we can invest on technology that would otherwise be too expensive to buy if we act alone. We could pool our marketing and even our productive strength so that we can. Yeah, I'm globalizing in my speech. I'm sorry. I'm too fast. It's flowing very fast. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, now I understand. So globalization in this sense provide an opportunity within a supply chain, because in the past you see yourselves as competitors, right? So it's very difficult to realize solidarity or even partnership among firms that you compete with. But because of this supply chain idea that you actually depend on each other and that the market is actually bigger than just the small market that you face in front of you, then this is really an opportunity to work more closely together. We call it in business, this is what we call the pre-competitive phase of the business, wherein before you compete, you can cooperate. And once you have pooled your resources, you bought the same technology or you pooled your marketing, after you have cooperated in these activities, then you can compete. But there are a lot of things that you can do together, not as competitors, but as partners. So solidarity with the future generation is likewise an urgent necessity. The race to expand production in order to realize those scale economies has resulted to an unprecedented rate of depletion of our resources. The environmental fallout will not only require a global response from governments and big business, but from every individual, every enterprise, no matter how small. Is an additional reason why improving the economic viability of small and medium enterprises while maintaining their small scale of production is so essential, also from the point of view of environmental sustainability. Social medium enterprises be embedded in local communities could be more sensitive and responsive to environmental challenges. They are direct stakeholders, direct beneficiaries, or victims of whatever environmental outcomes that will transpire in the future. And therefore, they could not only be better users, but also more responsible stewards of nature as well. Lastly, while solidarity is a necessary means to address the challenges posed by globalization, it is certainly an end in itself. Most of us will be familiar with the passage in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, when he said, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, the baker, that we can expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own social interests. But what is less familiar is the part when he says, and I quote, "The man whose life is spent in performing a few simple operations of which the effects are perhaps always the same, or nearly the same, has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention in finding out solutions for removing difficulties which never occur because they're mechanized. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion, and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. The torpor of his mind renders him not only incapable of relishing or bearing a part in any rational conversation, but of conceiving any generous, noble, or tender sentiment, and consequently of forming any just judgment concerning many even of the ordinary duties of everyday life. End of quote. So globalization, which has splintered production into these many tiny repetitive tasks, stretching the possibilities of division of labor to its very limits, has also alienated millions from the joy and excitement of creation, alienated them from the sense of accomplishment one may feel in seeing the finished product of his or her own labor, and savor the fulfillment of seeing another person benefit from what his or her own hands have created or have produced. Through solidarity, we reacquire the value of our hard work. Through the relationships that we form, not only within our enterprise, but also throughout the whole supply chain, we reassemble all those fragmented pieces of products and tasks, rediscovering the value of the service that we render to society. Our encounters in the workplace will trigger multiple opportunities for creation and innovation, and even the most repetitive of tasks will acquire meaning. And this is where our economic life can satisfy our deep spiritual yearning to find meaning in everything that we do. Factory Asia need not be a colorless, cheerless, soulless, so very much the opposite of its true nature. Asia can change the course of globalization by bringing about a unique kind of solidarity. It's unique because it will be borne out by that unique combination of pragmatism, hard work, collective resilience, but also a deep sense of the other, which only a long spiritual tradition of compassion and brotherhood can bring. The world has globalized Asia, but solidarity will make this globalization truly Asian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balaoing, for that informative and insightful discourse on the impact of globalization in Asia. Indeed, there are new opportunities to be shared, like the shared value creation, thus can solve the perennial social problems in our society.
Moving on, we're now going to focus on today's realities. Dr. Lorna Gold will walk us through on the challenges that EoC is facing today. Dr. Lorna Gold is currently working as the head of policy and advocacy with the Irish Catholic Agency for International Development, PROCRA, where she leads a very dedicated team pushing politicians for more just and sustainable policies on behalf of the world's poorest people. Prior to working in PROCRA, she worked in the Department of Politics at the University of York, where she was the recipient of the Joseph Rowntree Centennial Fellowship and an ESRC postdoctoral fellowship. She received a PhD in economic geography from the University of Glasgow. She is also a member of the International Commission of the Economy of Communion. To discuss with us the challenges of ecology, let us give a warm applause to Dr. Lorna Gold.
Sorry, just an announcement before Lorna begins, is that if you have, I know that these lectures are very heavy, and I'm sure that there are clarifications or questions. Please, in your notebook, you write these down because after Lorna's, we'll have a break, and then we'll have reactors and an open forum and a chance to entertain all the questions and clarifications. Yes?
Can you hear me now? I prefer to stand up. I feel a bit freer. It looks like I'm about to dance or something. I have the whole stage. Hopefully my presentation won't be too heavy and full, because already, Annette, you have lots of information in your heads. But I think they complement each other. And my way of presenting is full of images. So you can follow the images while I'm talking. So I want to talk to you a little bit, share with you some thoughts on the issue of sustainable development. In my presentation, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the challenges of sustainable development, the policy solutions being promoted to promote sustainable development today and the contradictions, the core conceptual problem that we face in relation to sustainable development, the contribution of Pope Francis, Laudato Si, and then to reflect, to give some first reflections on the EoC at 25 years, on how do we relate to this idea of sustainable development, and what can we bring to this discussion, important discussion today? Because I feel it's a really important issue looking to the future of the EoC in the next decades. So the challenge of sustainable development, Annette has already outlined many of the challenges we face today. I wanted to start with this image because in my work we deal with this issue all the time now. This is a young girl called Ernestina, and she lives in Malawi in Africa. I have to slow down. Ernestina, she could be a farmer in the Philippines as well. And she relies on the land for her existence. Every year, her family grow crops, they grow maize. And at the right time, they sow the seeds, and they are able then to have the harvest. They increase their livelihoods a little bit each year. Due to changing climate, the weather patterns over the past 10 years, 20 years, the rains have become unreliable. Also, the land that she's living on, there are great conflicts between large entities fighting now over the ownership of the land. She can no longer rely on the rains, and she can no longer rely on having a little bit of land to survive. The second image, you're very familiar with. This is Typhoon Haiyan, which struck the Philippines nearly 3 years ago, killing 6,000 people and making so many homeless. The frequency and the intensity of typhoons and other weather events are becoming more common as a result of climatic change. This is a new normal that we are all living with now. I have to point in this direction. These two images, how do you point this one? Oh, it's not working very well. Anyway, the island is a little island in the South Pacific called Nauru. It's the smallest nation in the United Nations. This island, like many, many islands in the Pacific, is now threatened due to climate change. Already this year, we know that 5 Pacific islands no longer exist. They are gone because of the rising seas. And we also know that many people are now climate refugees. That already they are facing the prospect that they need to find a new land. Many of the people already arriving into Europe, many tens of thousands of people, are also climate refugees. They are suffering from the changing climate. The final image here is Fort McMurray. You will have heard of this on the news. Yes. This wildfire in the north of Canada, in the tar sands region, which has wiped out 80% of a city. This is the effects also of a changing climate, a warming climate, and instability in our climate. It's the old version of the presentation, but it's fine. I also had a picture here of a bee. Why would I have a picture of a bee? Because the bee population in the world, who are possibly the hardest workers on this planet, has climbed by 50% in the past decades. Albert Einstein said, and we don't know if it's true or not because it hasn't happened, but he predicted if the bee population in the world is wiped out, human civilization will cease to exist within decades. Because the bees are the main pollinators of the main crops that we grow. So the situation for sustainability is very desperate at the moment. It's very serious. This situation is happening in a world that is very divided. If the people in the middle want to stand up, if you stand, this section in the middle, can you stand up for 1 minute? No, not the, just here. If you want to stand up. These people, around 65 people, 62 people, have the equivalent wealth, these people here, of the rest of the world. You can sit down. Sorry, they have the equivalent wealth of the bottom 3.6 billion people on this planet. So globalization, as Annette has said, has brought many increases in poverty and increases in wealth. But the increase for the top is far greater. Many people talk about a trickle-up economy. Yeah? A trickle-up economy, not a trickle-down economy. Because the wealth of this very elite group is has increased several times, several multiples. The reality is that climate change and environmental problems are happening in a very unequal society. The climate emissions, we take climate emissions as one example, but climate emissions are very unevenly spread across the world. Ireland is the one on the right, the red one. Our emissions per capita are 88 times those of an African. They are almost 10 times those of a Filipino. And yet the world economy is driving Africa, Philippines, everything towards the red column. In our lifetime, if nothing changes, if we continue to globalize in the same way, we will have emitted all the carbon into the atmosphere by 2035 that will take us beyond the safe threshold of global warming. This is the scientists. We also know that 80% of the reserves of oil and fossil fuels that are on the books of companies need to stay in the ground if we are to stay within our biological and ecological limits. This is a serious systemic issue for the global economy because the financial sector depends so heavily on the stability of oil and of oil investments. It's called the carbon bubble. We're living in it. I can say yesterday, I saw that this effects of carbon bubble are already happening. They're already starting. When I was walking up the hill with Luigino on the volcano, I bumped into a man from Scotland. He was from the oil industry in Scotland. And he told me how the oil sector has collapsed because the assets are being devalued. The overpricing of oil assets is now starting to be devalued. So this the collapse of oil price is already the start of this, the implosion of the carbon bubble. The big question we need to ask is what about those who come after us, and what about those who've not benefited from these emissions? People often do not understand what the climate problem is about, because we actually are emitting the carbon into the atmosphere. When it's there, it doesn't go away. So once we reach a certain level, we can't change it. It's there, the carbon emissions are there. So we have to stop emitting the carbon. So what are governments proposing in terms of addressing these issues? Last year was a very important year for sustainable development, very important year. At the UN signed the Sustainable Development Goals. They're wonderful goals. They want us to solve poverty, to solve inequality, to address climate change, to address disabilities, to address housing. There are 17 fantastic goals. And there are 167 targets to reach those goals. They also had the Finance for Development Summit, where they wanted to harness the resources to address sustainability, but found it very hard to find any finance to commit to these goals. And the Climate Summit in Paris. The Climate Summit in Paris was to address try to look at a binding agreement to stay within limits of climate change. The problem is that as a globalized society, these very worthy agreements are very weak. Because what else exists in our society? What's driving our society? Governments are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry because they depend on that industry for income and for the creation of wealth and the creation of growth. No economy until now has evolved into a high-performing economy without fossil fuels. So governments are subsidizing climate change. This is also what Annette was talking about. The structure of our economies means that governments and also our political elites are enabling large multinational corporations to siphon off the wealth from the workhouses, you could say, from the people who are actually doing the work, and to hide that wealth in things like Mossack Fonseca. You might have heard of the Panama Papers. It's a whole other world we never knew about, where there are trillions of dollars in places on the earth that lack transparency, and they can be hidden from accountable structures of governance. And also, governments are signing up to trade agreements, which will make it practically almost impossible to legislate to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So that you have TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership with America. In Europe, we have TTIP, which is coming. The problem with these is a problem of governance, because effectively governments are signing over the responsibility for policy on sustainable development to corporations who want to invest in their countries. So if a government in the future, and this is already happening, wants to legislate for environmental sustainability, they have to first ask Coca-Cola or Exxon Valdez, do you think it's okay? Will it be okay for your investments? Because those companies can sue the governments now out of court in private dispute mechanisms. The ISDS, they're called. So there's a change happening. And part of this change is because we have become trapped in a logic. We become trapped in a financial logic, and this reminds me of our good friend Leo Andringa. Back in 1997, he predicted in a meeting we had in Luminosa that the growth of the financial sector, out of which is many, many times bigger than the real economy, he said, devour us, was his words. Because in the financial sector, there is no mercy. Digitized financial automated transactions do not know mercy. And yet when this logic meets the real economy, like it did with the financial crash in the mortgages, the impacts were huge. Are you following me? I'm speaking very slowly, so it's going to take a little bit longer. The problem is that at the heart of our concept of sustainable development, there is a core conceptual problem. Anybody who has taught sustainable development, but if you're in business, you call it the triple bottom line. It's this intersections, which is a lovely diagram. It's almost like a flower. It's beautiful. Which says that there are 3 dimensions. So we have the economic, we have the social, and we have the environmental. And it gives equal weighting to all 3 of them. But what happens in business and in government is that the economic sector takes precedence. But the other 2, well, we'll get to them if we manage. You know? We'll get to them if there's time, but we rely on the economic to get us to the other 2. The reality of life is something more like this. We live inside the environmental sphere. We're included in it. And the social sphere is the foundation of the economy. The economy is the safe and just space for humanity. It's the bit in the middle. So these 3 on this side are not equal at all. This is a flawed model, but everything is based on this. Everything the Sustainable Development Goals is based on this. But the conceptual model has to shift towards this. If you think of us like a donut, I know that Filipinos like donuts because I saw them being sold a lot. But we're really like a donut. If you think of planet Earth as the donut, the outer rim are our limits. our biological, our ecological limits. And we know now these exist. Science tells us they exist. Ecologists, biologists. We can't unexist them. We can't invent, yeah. They exist. Our economy only exists within these. Yeah? It's very simple, but it's actually revolutionary. Accepting the reality of this, our planetary limits and the social limits which underpin the economy, the social thresholds, are the first key step. It helps us to prioritize what are the key shifts that need to happen in order to make a shift to sustainability. On the one hand, for effective political governance, the changes that need to happen within our political system, but also the new forms of bottom-up, market-driven initiatives, institutions that need to evolve in order, and the reforms that need to happen in order to be at the service of sustainability. I'm going to have to speed up somehow. What I wanted to really talk about is Pope Francis' contribution. Because whilst the UN and these processes have been failing, Pope Francis has made a unique contribution to this debate, which is really involving many people outside the Catholic Church. His thought is recognized. Because he says two things I think are very important. The first, the cry of the earth, so the ecological problem is the cry of the poor. They're interconnected. And a strategy is needed to rethink processes in their entirety, not just the segments. It's not enough to include a few superficial ecological considerations, but it's failing to address the logic underpinning the current culture. He calls for an integral perspective based on a dialogue between faith and science, and a cultural shift based around a counterculture. These are phrases he uses: less is more, ecological conversion, and it has to have the poor at the center. So what are the prevailing mindsets that he challenges? He challenges mindsets that are utilitarianism, which seeks profit and objectifies other things and other people. The specialist mentality, which ignores other forms of knowing and other forms of intelligence, such as the plants, such as other ways of knowing about life. Short-termism, he uses a wonderful phrase called rapidification, which is about this fact we feel like we're running all the time, and we have to speed up to stay still. He calls it rapidification. And the various forms of divisions and parochialism which dominate international politics and realities. He calls this the technocratic paradigm, which you will see many of the aspects of it are really what is driving globalization at the moment. This technocratic paradigm, the mindsets of this technocratic paradigm. So if we want to challenge the current dominant mindsets or the current globalization, we need to challenge it at that level of the paradigm. If we want to continue to have a market economy, an open market economy, we need to actually radically change our concept of what the market is. So the EoC, what do we have to say in this really important discussion and debate and context that we're living in? I think we have two different contributions, but I'm going to only talk about one. The first contribution is around the business level and how we incorporate a more ecological and environmental sustainability approach in the businesses. We have a long way to go here, and I think the EoC has not focused, perhaps in its first generation, in this issue. We have some guidelines on ecology, but we don't really embed them. So we've been more focused on the social, but we haven't grasped the connections too much. We have some examples, and we're going to talk about the Earth Cube. But it's time to integrate our thinking. And there's some, I'm not going to go into this because I think we don't have time this morning. I want to stay at the big picture level. So the mindset shift, to me, first and foremost, is where the EoC can make a huge contribution. The EoC proposes a different set of mindset, a different collection, you could say, of mindsets to the dominant ones in the economic paradigm we're living in. There are 4 of them that Pope Francis outlines in terms of the, you could say, the problematic mindsets. And these, to me, are where the EoC can offer. So I'm going to go through them briefly, one by one. At core of the EoC is the idea of gift, of appreciation. Pope Francis starts from the premise of Saint Francis. He says that poverty and austerity for Saint Francis were no mere veneer of asceticism, but something much more radical, a refusal to turn reality into an object simply to be used and controlled. And at the heart of the EoC, we can see this same matrix, cultural matrix, as what Pope Francis is actually referring to. This idea that underpinning everything, communion, gift, appreciation for the world, for nature, for existence, has to be at the core of our business, has to be at the core of our work. It has led to a renewal of the concept of sobriety, with a focus on being rather than having. And the profits of the businesses then being generated as gift to be shared with the poor. The second contribution of the EoC is a little bit more conceptual, but I think very important to highlight. Pope Francis highlights the fragmentation of knowledge, and Annette already pointed to this, the splintering of knowledge. The fragmentation of knowledge and the isolation of bits of information can actually become a form of ignorance. I think Adam Smith had something, he was on to something. A form of ignorance unless they are integrated into a broader vision of reality. So the technical knowledge that we have is only of any use if it's at the service of something greater. It's spirituality of unity which underpins the EoC and the Focolare. Social love becomes the integrating component in the definition of a new humanity. The generation of communion becomes both the means and the ends of the knowledge that we generate. Pope Francis, at the beginning of Laudato Si, says something really beautiful. He says, we're not here just to accumulate knowledge. We're here to own the suffering of the world and to transform it. So our approach to our business, our understanding. And this, in this context, the EoC as a movement of peoples, and this kind of meeting becomes really important because it becomes a space of interdisciplinarity, of cross-functionality, where we can generate new ideas at the service of communion. And this is completely in line with it. You could say it gives us an advantage, a unique selling point as well as an idea. Because design theory tells us that innovation happens at the edges and at the meeting points of different schools of thought and different ways of seeing the world. So the generativity of the EoC comes from this often confusing, messy process where we're trying to make sense because we're generating new ideas at the edges. Short-termism and short-term results which dominate our culture and our economy. In the EoC, They become the horizon of eternity. Pope Francis talks about when you think about future generations, your children, your grandchildren, things change. You think about something different. You slow down. In the EoC, short-term goals matter, but the measure of our actions is always on future generations. The question the EoC entrepreneurs ask themselves is, what will remain? And their answer to themselves is, only love remains. It's a calling, it becomes a vocation, which brings it also transforms the structures of the businesses, the priorities of the businesses, the priorities of the economy. The final mindset which Pope Francis highlights, which has an answer in the EoC, is around parochialism, nationalisms. We lack awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging and future to be shared by everyone. This Annette talked about as well, this sense that we are become invisible to each other because we're all kind of working in our little fragmented parts. In the EoC, the invisible other becomes visible. The relationships become visible and an opportunity for communion. It becomes translated into networks, into communion of goods, into ideas as services. The educational component of the EoC embeds a sense of being global citizens in the people who are involved in the initiative and the project. You could say that the EoC offers some possibilities of an integral paradigm. But importantly, it doesn't destroy what's there before. Within this integral paradigm, there is space for a utilitarianism which becomes new in the broader context of gift and appreciation. There is space for short-term results within the context of the horizon of eternity. There is space, not for parochialism, but for the interests of the specific, the local, within the context of one human family. And there is room for specialization within the context of integration. So the EoC doesn't propose a model which means that we sit outside the market and we just build eco-communities. It actually integrates and can resanitize that remaining part of the market that is open to being changed. In the EoC in the next 25 years, we're called to new horizons. I think that this question of the ecology and ecological component is really important. We need to embed it within our businesses and see it as a massive opportunity for us to be creating businesses which respond to the crisis of ecology and poverty today. But we also can make a much more powerful contribution at the level of ideas in terms of integrated perspectives. I actually changed this in my new yeah. What I wanted to say at the end, and I had a beautiful picture. If you imagine a seed in soil. Luigino yesterday talked about the botanic economy. We're calling it botanic now. And he said that maybe you need 1% of the plant to regenerate. But you don't even need 1%. You only need one seed that's planted in the right soil. So in our EoC, even though much of the economy around us may be contaminated, if we have the EoC and the values in the one seed inside this market economy, in right conditions, it can thrive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. for listening and pragmatic talk on sustainable development. And your donut model, the EoC's integral contribution to the ecology. So at this point in time, we'd like to have a break, a 30-minute break, and let us reconvene at 10:30. For